Hello. Welcome to everybody who's joining us. I'm really excited to be joined today by a really wonderful group of panelists, and excited to have everybody who's joining us today via Zoom and via Facebook as well. So we're looking at the new frontiers of storytelling and what the storytelling landscape looks like today. And we're going to dive into kind of new creative tools for making content. We're going to look at some stories themselves and how they were made. And we're going to talk about new platforms and how audiences are experiencing new types of media. I'm very honored today to be with some of the most extraordinary people working in this industry today. And their paths span how content is made, what stories are told, and how experiences get distributed. So just a bit of housekeeping. We're going to be taking questions in the chat box. So please do leave your comments and your questions throughout this talk. And we're definitely interested in keeping this a conversation and keeping it open and connecting with the industry out there. So thank you to everybody for joining us today. So I guess the industry that we're talking about today is broadly XR. When I talk about things like virtual reality, they sometimes seem esoteric or a bit niche, and something that's kind of maybe exclusive to a small group of creative technologists. But the way that humans are interacting with technology continues to evolve. And the pioneers who are exploring the new tools and new storytelling vernacular are really setting the path for what our collective future holds. And I strongly believe that the future is really being invented now. During this pandemic in particular, we're witnessing even more digitalization of our lives. We're increasingly being mediated by screens. And creators now are exploring how do we bring spatial presence into these environments, just like this Zoom call. So I guess to kick us off, I want to take a look back at where we've been and how far we've come. So if I look back, 15 years ago, I hadn't joined Facebook yet. When I took photos, I had an actual little camera that I used to take with me, not just my phone. My phone itself had like physical buttons to press. The iPad hadn't been invented. I stored files on a flash drive to move them between devices. I watched movies on DVDs. And fast forward to where we are today, I can dance alongside a hologram of my favorite TikTok star, or I can enter Fortnite and buy concert merch for my digital avatar. And those things would have blown my mind 15 years ago, but they seem pretty normal today. And I guess it's with that lens that I want to talk about the landscape that we're in today, and kind of how this is really setting the scene for where we're going next. So I'm going to introduce each of our very brilliant panelists, and I'd like to pose a question to each of you to kick this off, which is, if each of you is to put on your science fiction hat, what will our daily lives look like in 2035? How are we going to be engaging with other people and our technologies? So I'm going to start with the brilliant Leen, who's coming to us from Brussels in Belgium. She's a software entrepreneur and a web XR expert. And since 2011, she's been focused on the democratization of media across platforms and devices. And in XR, she's advocating for browser-based experiences to be able to reach immersion at scale. She started LucidWeb in 2016. LucidWeb is actually powering the content that you can watch as part of this Electric Africa Festival. And she's also the co-founder of Women in Immersive Tech Europe, which counts more than 2,000 members across Europe. So Leen, where are we going to be in 2035?
Hello, everyone. Thank you for having me, first of all. Yes, it's a very good question. And of course, there are many answers to that question. I see the technology evolve in a way that, by basically having those stronger internet connections available, the technology will move away much more from being hardware dependent. So I do believe that the future lies with very light applications that are basically driven by 5G or 6G, or even maybe by then 8G. So I think it's going to be a lot more lighter, lighter meaning in terms of what we need to have installed to be able to have access to it. And in the next step as well, basically VR and AR are interactive technologies, which means that by combining that with AI, a buzzword, of course, all the interactions are going to be a lot more customized and personal. So I do see the science fiction a bit like very light software applications that are really personalized to the person really using it in their daily lives. So yes, that's my point of view.
Thanks. Next up, we have Darren, based in the UK. Darren is a writer, producer, director, and co-founder of the production studio East City Films. He's best known for creating immersive documentaries about social justice, community, and UK political policy. His last piece of work, Common Ground, is about the regeneration of the largest housing estate in Europe and mixes 360 video, 3D models, photogrammetry, archive, and interaction. It's won numerous awards internationally, including the World Press Photo Award for Best VR Narrative. So given that you are spanning all these different types of technologies, what does that mean for where we're going to be in 15 years' time, Darren?
I don't know. I mean, I think for me, you know, I'm primarily a storyteller, so it's interesting to see, you know, all the different advancements you mentioned earlier, you know, and how we interact with them and how we use them. In terms of the quality of our lives and how we interact with community and how we try and build communities, I think is a really interesting area that technology is changing. It's kind of mutating how we interact with people in terms of community, how we connect. It's sometimes improving it, but it's also fragmenting community a little bit. So, I mean, I would like to see in the next kind of 20 years, people really getting a hold of the future of technology and making sure that it's benefiting society in a way that is you know, not a non-commercial way, that we are going back to what the ideals of the internet were and what you know, social media can be. In terms of XR and that stuff, you know, I agree with Leen in that sense. I don't know as much about it as she does. She's an expert. But in terms of storytelling and VR and XR, you know, interaction, really sort of developing, and touch and multi-sensory, and so that the way that we are using this technology becomes much more immersive, much more just much more advanced in the sense of what it's able to do and where it's able to take us.
Yeah,
I don't really know.
Well, stay tuned, we'll find out. Rick, I'd love to hear from you. Rick is a technologist based in Johannesburg, South Africa, a creative technologist with a huge passion for disruptive technologies, and has been called one of the smartest minds in XR, and I definitely second that. He's the CTO of Eden, a company he co-founded that makes virtual reality easy to use in business, mainstream, and art applications. He has over 20 years of professional experience in the digital space and has created one of the earliest platforms for online gaming, which was built for Nokia phones, and the platform reached an international audience and amassed millions of app downloads even before smartphones and the App Store even existed. So you seem like you know, you'll have the answers for us, Rick. Where are we headed?
I wish I had the exact answers, but I think I'm extremely excited for where we're going, especially within you know, the African continent. I think data and the cost of data for us, in my opinion, is one of the biggest stumbling blocks to access these platforms. And I think this only now is starting to kind of come to fruition. And I really believe in the future, data will be as accessible as anything else and very, very cheap for people to access. I think we already see this with, you know, the low orbit satellites getting deployed. So I think on, you know, in South Africa in particular, I'm really excited to see those data costs drop completely, because that will see a huge shift in people adopting these platforms, especially XR, which is so data heavy. I also think we're going to start seeing quite a cultural shift in terms of what people perceive professionalism to be. I think COVID's kind of shown us almost a little glimmer of that, with, you know, how people have always had this concept of, you know, we can't work from home, or we have to be at a studio, and it literally took an event that wasn't so positive to kind of show the strength of these kind of tools. And I think that really leads into the discussion of metaverse, and where we see, you know, once VR units and AR units really become wearable devices, so not these giant things you have to put on, but actually a part of you, like a pair of sunglasses. I think that's where we're really going to see the future. So with the data and with the wearables, that's going to just completely open up almost a cultural shift into being within the digital space and the real space, and both will be as normal as each other, which I think will be quite fascinating.
Yeah, thanks, Rick. I'm excited to unpack all of those things more with you throughout this chat today. And then last, but certainly not least, we have Yasmin, who's representing New York here. Yasmin is a co-founder at Scatter, and she's also an Emmy Award-winning immersive director and a 2020 United States Artists Fellow. She directed 0 Days VR, which, among other accolades, won a Webby Award and was presented at the World Economic Forum in Davos. And she's also the co-creator of 18 Days in Egypt, which is an interactive documentary about the Egyptian Revolution that was lauded as one of the moments in innovation in participatory documentary. Yasmin, where are we headed in 15 years' time?
Well, hi, everybody, and thank you for having me. And it's really great to be here and part of this amazing panel. Listening to you, Rick, I'm like, oh, you know, hard to follow that, because I'm kind of really in the same camp. But I'll add on to sort of like this idea of the metaverse, and just like sort of the experience of this year. And like, I love the prompt and thinking about 15 years ago, where I remember like going to grad school where I started my career path, and, you know, this kind of blending of technology and storytelling, and remembering that the iPhone at the time was the new emerging technology, and, you know, what, you know, not understanding how to become like an appendage of how it has become over time. And I think over this year, kind of speaking, you know, upon what you were saying, Rick, about this metaverse and how kind of we're going to be totally wearing it, surrounded. I actually feel like our COVID experience is kind of a hint of that, which is, you know, how the virtual and digital world has taken on a whole new meaning. And I think all of us can relate to this. And it's taken on some physicality, right? A tangibility that it didn't before. And I feel it's existing all the time in this textual layer, whether or not we acknowledge it. And I guess I see the future in the, you know, exactly the way Rick described it, but kind of like more of that, where relationships will shift. I'm quite a tech positive person and tech positive futurist. So I think that there'll be less friction, obviously, in the interfaces, and I do believe it'll be still human based and values based. To echo what Darren was saying, but also because our world has become more connected, I do see it in a hopefully more accessible also, that it's not just of the privileged, you know, societies or the Silicon Valleys, but something that is actually more accessible for all. But yeah, heading towards that metaverse, multiverse, however you want to describe it. But yeah.
Yeah, I certainly agree that this is the first part of that, right? You know, being able to kind of connect across geographies, you know, all in the same kind of digital space. And then, you know, we're going to see kind of a move more towards how does this start to look more like, you know, meeting in person as we kind of figure out new digital tools. So today we're going to be talking about a number of things. One of those things is, you know, new tools for story making and what kind of stories are possible. And Yasmin, your work kind of spans two worlds, because you've told stories in new ways that sort of weren't possible before. And you're also part of the team behind DepthKit, which is a software tool that lets creators anywhere in the world film real people as holograms. And I guess the thread that I see running through both is sort of putting humanity first, you know, making the software accessible to a broad creative community, and then also sort of telling nonfiction stories about the most kind of critical social issues of our time. So I'm going to hand it over to you to share kind of more of your work with us.
All right, thank you. Let's see, 1 second while I share my screen. All right, well, so as Caitlin mentioned, I'm one of the co-founders of Scatter, and we are a technology studio, and we are based in Brooklyn, New York, and we are pioneering this emerging language that we're calling volumetric filmmaking. And we also make DepthKit, our product DepthKit, which is the most widely used tool for volumetric video. And essentially, we're a team of artists and technologists. We make a body of, we have a body of original award-winning work at Scatter, and it's premiered across film festivals since 2014. And, you know, including 0 Days, which won an Emmy for Stunning Approaches to Documentary and premiered at Sundance. And our work has exhibited at, you know, several, you know, institutions, including the Museum of Modern Art and the World Economic Forum. And I wanted to talk a little bit about, what Caitlin touched upon today. So I'm going to introduce you to a bit of our work and a little bit about our tool making and our product, and then just the general community, volumetric filmmaking community. And I'll try to be short and sweet. So first I wanted to talk about 0 Days, which is based on a feature-length documentary by the award-winning Academy Award director, Alex Gibney. And we made an original adaptation of the film into an immersive virtual reality experience that tells the story of the Stuxnet virus, which is the first cyber weapon that we know of in history that can cause real-world physical destruction. And in our adaptation, we wanted to basically take a talking head documentary and really tackle this idea of, like, how can you tell a story where your lead character is a piece of code, and so that code could speak for itself. And that's the premise behind 0 Days, where the story comes to life from the perspective of the virus itself. And so we built this entire piece where we enable you as an audience member to be embedded in these intangible worlds of cyber warfare. And I had decided earlier that I wasn't going to show a trailer, but I changed my mind because I think it might actually be more beneficial to sort of just show you a little bit of snippets. I'm going to just jump into the trailer for Stuxnet.
It's a covert operation. Maybe you don't know as much as you think you know.
Here is a piece of software that should only exist in the cyber realm, and it is able to cause real-world physical destruction.
Stuxnet wasn't just an evolution. It was really a revolution in the threat landscape.
Everyone's getting this story wrong, and we have to get it right. Stakes are too high.
We are the most vulnerable nation on Earth to cyber attack ourselves.
In international law, when some country targets a nuclear facility, it's an act of war.
I understand the difference in destruction is dramatic, but this has the whiff of August 1945. Somebody just used a new weapon, and this weapon will not be put back into the box.
So as you can see at Scatter, we like to bend the form of documentary, and hopefully, you're getting a sense of what we mean by volumetric filmmaking, which is these kind of like the marriage of the power and flexibility of game engines with this craft and sensibility of filmmaking. And this project, Blackout, is quite actually relevant to what's going on right now in the United States. As you know, we're undergoing an unprecedented election, or election in limbo. And this blackout was actually created in response to that. And what does it mean to be American, or what does it mean to belong to American, or identity in a very divisive and polarizing climate? And so what we did is we wanted to create a crowdsourced sourced volumetric film, or that, you know, we could explore these topics to the lived-in experiences of real New Yorkers. And so this project essentially is, you know, we cast people on a rolling basis. People would be, you know, sharing their most intimate stories, and you have this magical ability on the train to hear the thoughts and the stories of the people around you. And everything is, you know, mapped one-to-one. So you really feel like you're in the stories, you're actually invited in the stories, in the world where these stories take place. And you really have, the characters really have a sense of presence. And, you know, there's real intimacy in this shared space. So I'll share a quick trailer of Black Cat and then move on.
Stand clear of the closing doors, please.
I like to think of the subway as sort of like the veins of New York.
I hate touching the polls though. The polls are so dirty.
Half these people probably didn't even vote. Why is it always white people that I feel like I have to prove myself to? Is that racist to think?
American dream, it's really big. How many thousands people, they live together like a painting. It's beautiful for me.
You know, the good news is you're going to be amazing. And you're going to look great. And you're going to fit in, and you're going to find a path. And you will be loved and respected.
This is my train. This is my train home.
And I'll quickly, briefly touch upon this upcoming project, which is our newest co-production called The Changing Same. And this project is in production right now, and it's a magical realist VR experience that travels through 400 years of America's history of racial injustice. And you know, the goal of this project is to remember and understand, witness essentially a collective history, and allow for healing and growth and moving forward. And it's a beautiful story that's infused with magical realism and Afrofuturism. And the idea is moving between the past and future in this time travel experience in a non-linear way, and to really confront our history of lynching and our legacy of racial violence and mass incarceration and police brutality and so forth. And the idea is to obviously acknowledge the past and build a new future, and retell the stories in a context that confronts the past but reimagines a new future, and what would that equitable future look like. And so this brings me to kind of, scatter what we're about, something Caitlin touched upon, which is like core to our ethos is the belief that creativity and art propel innovation, and you just can't have one or the other. And so in the making of our films, and even the birth of DepthKit as a product or a tool came in creating, achieving creative vision, or creating films that, and with the tools that out there just didn't exist or didn't suffice. And so that's actually how DepthKit was created, in the making of clouds. And so that's kind of how we work, story making and tool building as a company. And our volumetric filmmaking approach is obviously powered by our own tools and our product DepthKit, which essentially is a way to capture the world in depth and color. And so it's like our goal is to allow creators to enable you to create worlds as immersive as as video, but as immersive as a 3D world, use as simple as creating a video. And so it's about real humans, real stories, or translating the world around you. And what's interesting is that I know we're talking a lot about XR on this panel, but it's like essentially the way we see volumetric filmmaking. It's a creative tool. It's a way of expressing yourself that is for all storytellers, whether you work in documentary or you work in immersive media. So it's a tool for a new creative approach, a new creative medium for capturing human performance and holograms. And so it's been really exciting to see. I'd encourage you to see, if you're interested in this space and what is volumetric filmmaking, you can go to our website. You can see our own projects. You can see a whole library of case studies or other projects that have been built by this emerging discipline of volumetric filmmakers, and it's been growing, and it's really excited. And they've been showing at prestigious festivals, and I'm just really proud of this growing community, and just wanted to share some of the dynamic work that's out there. So I'd really encourage you to go check it out. And thank you so much.
Thanks, Yasmin. I'm really grateful that you kind of set the tone for kind of understanding how story and creativity kind of needs to exist side by side with the technologies that kind of serve each other. And I think for me that's pretty evident in your work, Darren, as well. You describe yourself to me, Darren, as a documentarian and not a creative technologist. But yet your work has combined so many, real, cutting edge technologies and techniques. And you sort of push the boundaries of what a story can be beyond anything that's actually ever existed before. So I'd love for you to share some more details about your work with our audience. Okay, well, that's nice of you to say. I always feel because I work with lots of technical people, but I never really consider myself like a creative technologist. That's probably why. But I love using the tools, and like DepthKit is one of those. When that came out, we got that straight away, and it's a real thrill to hear Yasmin talk about it. And we've used it so much actually and experimented. But I'll share my screen. I'm going to talk about. What am I going to talk about? Where has it gone? Hold on a sec. There we go. Sorry. There. Okay, so let me know if you can see that. So yeah, I run a company in London called eCity Films, which I've been running actually for about 16 years now, which is a long time, and it's morphed and it's changed from being really a company that was doing a lot of live music and stuff like that to in about 2014, late 2014, we started working in predominantly 360 video, and that's also then been kind of morphing and changing into VR and AR and all sorts of different things. But we tend to focus predominantly on documentary, and that's my main focus, is telling documentary stories. And I really started doing that in 2015 with a piece called Witness 360 77, which was a documentary piece that was at IDFA and various other festivals, which looked at the 10-year anniversary of the 7/7 bombings. And it's really the retelling of that from one person's point of view, a lady called Jackie Putnam, who kind of survived it. And then I moved on to another piece of work called Indefinite, which won the first ever Sheffield DocFest commission for VR, and then went on to be on the New York Times. And that's about indefinite detention in the UK asylum system. And again, with that, it was 360 video, but then we started to really experiment with animation and different sort of, again, like Yasmin said, like magical realism within the way of telling the story that we're doing. And then most recently, I made a piece called Common Ground, which was, I guess, after about 4 years working in VR and XR, was a culmination of lots of different techniques that I had kind of learnt and things that I wanted to apply. It's, I think, as you mentioned, it's a mix of 360 video, photogrammetry and 3D model spaces that we captured on the estate, a lot of use of archive and trying to find new ways of using archive in that space, interaction as well, spatial sound, of course, and it tells the story of the Aylesbury estate, which is was the largest estate in Europe, housing estate, and how this estate now is being regenerated. This is somebody who lives on the estate, who used to live on the estate actually when we made it, called Anthony. And the story really is about regeneration, gentrification, and how I guess commercial interests and political will change how people perceive social housing, especially in the UK. But I mean, I think it's something that is relevant globally, really. I call it, I'm coining this phrase embodied documentary. For me, this is something that is really important to me and my work in the future. I want not only for it to be immersive, but you to feel embodied within the documentary itself. And that's, in this instance, it's really obviously the obvious things about, being able to see and to hear and to move around volumetric space, but also, objects, perception and manipulation, and how we can use that to sort of deepen the documentary narrative. So
you know, as I mentioned, these are some of the things that some of the techniques that we used in this piece. It's quite a large piece. It's half an hour long, and here's a quick trailer of it that you can have a look at, so you get a taste of what it was about.
It was a really good place to bring up a family. That's why I chose to live in this area, and that's why I'd like to stay.
I don't think you'll ever find a stronger community.
My home means an awful lot to me. You know, I've brought a family up there. My late husband died there.
Whole community is gonna be wiped out from here, and our voice never been heard.
London is becoming a city for wealthy people, especially inner city London.
We need to go to make way for empty flats for foreign investors.
So I was going to talk a little bit about, I mean, at the beginning of it, we had all sorts of different ideas for making this piece of work. Obviously, we had quite a complicated narrative that involved politics, you know, social justice, and also kind of the portrayal of, I guess, working class people in the UK and how they're sort of demonized. And we looked at different ways of doing it. And these are some of the early sort of kind of sketches and just really basic kind of like how it might work, the experience. And then we kind of mapped out like the different roles for the different kind of mediums that we were going to use, like how we were going to use video, not only 360 video, but also traditional 16:9 video, and how we're going to use archive and animation, photogrammetry and interaction, and how they all had sort of different parts to play in this piece of work, and they all had to kind of knit together for me quite seamlessly. And one of the big issues with this is that I come from a filmmaking background, but was working with obviously game engine design, but I wanted this to be a very much a seamless experience between cinematic 360 and game engine, and wanted for you to not really feel you were moving in from one to the other. Wanted it to be just kind of seamless. So this image, Caitlin, you wanted me to show, which was kind of almost very close to the final sort of kind of architecture of the experience, with all the different bits and pieces that are kind of working in conjunction with each other. And within each of those, there's a lot of design and research that's gone into each kind of subject matter as you go through the narrative. The thing about this one was really that I was working with interaction for the first time. I'd worked in 360 video mainly, and the 3 degrees of freedom. So being able to kind of bring interaction into the documentary narrative was really, really great for me. And so we had a few ideas about how we could do stuff. And one of the main is a portal idea. One of the main themes of the documentary is how the intended spaces, how they were designed, the utopian ideas around them, how they'd been sort of, how they'd kind of fallen into disrepair through lack of investment. So what you see here is a car park, an undercroft, which was a really big design feature, but no one ever used them, so they become derelict spaces. And what we did is we had 360 video, and then we designed what would be in them in the 1960s, and kind of overlaid that onto the 360 sphere. But then we designed what you see here is like a portal. We have like the test version, and then the final version down in the bottom, which is a way simply of like, I mean, I think this interaction worked really well for us in a documentary sense. It allowed us, our audience, quickly to understand the relationship of the space itself with its history. And, you know, we have a narrator as well going on at the same time, but it was, you know, it kind of almost spoke 1,000 words for us, you know, just by doing something very natural. We did a similar thing with a stairwell, which we captured in photogrammetry, which I'll show you here. And everybody that's in this stairwell, it's a scene about crime and antisocial behavior and vandalism, but how the community itself kind of fought back against that. But I'm often surprised, you know, when people do this, they have a spray can and they have a wall which already has graffiti on it, and the fact that nobody hesitates to spray the wall. Nobody is reticent about that. And for me, it's interesting in terms of documentary about what that says. You know, you put people in a space that is a lived space, a real space, and you give them the same context as the people that live in it, and immediately they'll grow and graffiti, and they won't see that as a as maybe vandalism or antisocial behavior. They understand the context in which people live within these spaces. We also had other spaces that we worked with, like, and including, you know, we used newspapers and archive just to kind of, again, deepen the interaction, to deepen the documentary narrative. So for me, it was about, if you didn't go over to the table and read the newspaper, it wouldn't change really the outcome of the documentary. But if you did, you were rewarded with more texture, more understanding. And so these were lots of the things that we did. I've got more slides, but that's probably enough about Common Ground. So I'll just stop there. But let's see if I can stop there.
That's absolutely brilliant, Darren. It's extraordinary to see the span of your work, and I really appreciate you sharing the kind of how the sausage is made as well. I think it's very interesting to see kind of a transition from I guess the tools that we know and love, coming from a filmmaking background, and then sort of translating that as you kind of start to interact with more technologists. So kind of seeing, you know, swim lanes diagrammed out with decision trees, sort of becoming part of a creative process. Is a really interesting evolution to see.
And it's funny because no one's really, you know, I think there's a lot of people kind of working independently in their own silos, trying to tackle this stuff and not really having a framework in which to say, you know, this is what I should be doing to write this script or to map this out. Right. And it's quite interesting in the UK, there's the NFTS Film School are trying to work on a set of tools that will be, you know, like a set of tools that we would all use to do that. And it's interesting, during that research, like, everyone's doing different things, you know, and it's like, can we take a piece of this? Can we take a piece of, you know, traditional film script writing, a piece of game design, theater, blocking, you know, and put it into one sort of universal way of creating stuff. I mean, I don't think that will happen, because I think everyone inherently has their own sort of practice and their own way that their mind works. And in lockdown, mine at the moment for a new project is lots of big sheets of A1 paper stuck to my bedroom wall, where my wife's not happy about it, but it's like, because I've got like my mind on the wall at the moment. It's a bit disturbing when you walk in there, but you know, it's you know, different processes for different people.
Yeah, well, I guess, you know, to that point, we have someone else on this panel who I think, you know, has come to an outcome of an extraordinary body of phenomenal and beautiful work. But whereas you know, sort of have the filmmaking background, Rick, you started out very much as a technologist. You're an extremely adept software developer, and basically, in my mind, an ultra nerd. I, you know, have complete awe for how your brain works, and yet you collaborate with fine artists. And are behind, you know, some of the most beautiful virtual reality experiences and installations. So I'd love for you to share more of your journey.
Yeah, thanks so much, Caitlin. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much, Electric South, for putting together Electric Africa. I think firstly, it's so needed on the continent, and just big ups to the whole team behind putting this together. Yeah, so as Caitlin mentioned, my background's been in game design for many years, back when Nokia was a thing, back when app stores wasn't really a set thing yet. And I've always kind of been chasing kind of this, you know, what is the new technology? What is the things that I don't understand, because I have to understand it, and how can I implement that into the creative space? Because we really believe at Eden, you know, we all art is in our DNA, and we always work hand in hand with tech and art together. So I'll share my screen quickly now and take you through a little bit of what we do. So firstly, as mentioned, we really believe in technology. We really believe in the power, especially of immersive technology tools like virtual reality, augmented reality, volumetric video. Virtual reality for us, as you see in this image, is really, it gets us so excited for the creative community, because I think there's this misconception about virtual reality being extremely difficult once you're in the headset. And yes, it can be very technical getting to that point of getting a headset on. But for any artist, we hold these things called arts and technology sessions, where basically on a Friday, we open up our studio and we bring in various artists from various different disciplines. We throw them inside of VR headsets and explain how depth kit works, show them depth kit, show them augmented reality, show them 3D printing, basically just give them a crazy deep dive into tech for one day. And quite often we see the same process happen. The artists will arrive and they're like, no, I'm not technical, or, you know, I don't do CAD. And literally within an hour, that perception's been completely thrown out the window, and they sculpting for the first time in 3D. They then 3D printing their sculptures, and seeing that kind of leapfrogging effect happen to these artists just really keeps us going and really pushes us to keep us on our toes, because as we all know, artists asks very unique questions between artist 1 and artist 2 and artist 3. So as technologists, that really helps us, kind of puts us on our toes, puts us in the moment where we have to very quickly try and solve solutions and kind of figure out with artists. So we've had quite a few artists coming through. There's a depth kit on the left there. And we really just love this process. Obviously with COVID, that coming around, that changed things a bit. So we had to put a pause on this, but very excited to say we are kicking this program back off again very soon. On top of that, it's not only at our studio. We really believe in tech. We really believe in tech and arts, and we do a lot of talks and workshops kind of around the world, that, you know, going through these processes, doing demos, because one of the things with VR, it's very hard to understand until you have a headset on your face, and I think anyone in the industry kind of sees that. So just touching on some of the work in the past, this was the Invisible exhibition. It was a collaboration with Eden and the Center for the Less Good Idea. And this kind of, I'd say, kicked off a lot of the process for us on this concept of technicality and the creation tools. So in this case, what we did is we invited about 12 South African artists. They came to the center and they would sculpt a sculpture inside of VR. And, you know, as we know, anyone that can draw can sculpt in VR. It's really that human-centered. So what we then did is we took those VR sculptures, we extracted them and put them into AR. So we could actually display these to a lot of people at the same time in the gallery space. So here you can see a work by Mbogeni Fakudze, and that's his sculpture he created in Siltbrush. And then now it's put in an augmented reality device where you can see that in a physical space. So here that sculpture is again. And the great thing is you can very quickly change context, and now here's his artwork with other sculptures that form part of a little festival during that time. Another great thing, this is William Kentrude sculpting in the headset. And again, one of the big powers of virtual reality is here's William's phone, and you can very quickly tell William's brushstrokes. It's not like there's this disconnect between the artist and their creation and that final piece. And traditionally, technical, you know, CAD design has a massive boundary. You don't get that kind of human brushstroke across. So this, we see this again and again. Here's another artist, Frederick Clark, and this is drawn in Siltbrush in VR. Me and Fred often had these kind of discussions and arguments around me for tech, him not for tech. And it was just fascinating working with an artist like that and seeing him create something like this. There must have been 5,000 brushstrokes in this sphere that he created. One of our bigger projects was with Mary Sabande, Crescendo of Ecstasy. This was a huge installation that had a digital twin of the physical space. And every show, we really try and kind of push ourselves and do something quite different. In this case, we had 4 different VR headsets. What you're seeing there is actually one of the VR headsets we created. Again, you know, we feel like we're so in love with the tech, but it shouldn't be about the tech. The tech should bring the magic to the show. And so the show, we were very very conscious of making sure the tech was not there as tech, because especially in South Africa, there's this innate fear of a lot of people to engaging with technology. So what we did is we had a 3D scan of Mary's face, and then we 3D printed that and put all the guts and the tech inside of the headset itself. That made it very easy for people to engage and disengage with the work. There's an example of how someone would engage with the artwork there. Another project was Old Masters, New Realities. In this case, we worked with Wayne Barker and Lady Scorley, and then their previous kind of counterparts. So I'm just going to chat very briefly on Wayne Barker. He worked a lot with Pierre Neef, who was a famous South African artist in the past. And he, you know, we had this idea with him to really bring people into Wayne's studio and do it in a way that if the viewer was curious enough, they would unlock more content to view. So what we did is we filmed Wayne's studio, captured it in 360. We then shot Wayne on green screen so we could bring him into these worlds. We got him creating poetry, we got him creating sculptures. And then what we did is we had all of this lit. So only when you specifically looked at certain areas, which Wayne would kind of allude to, would that open up more chapters of the experience. So basically it was up to you to be curious enough to go and actually see the whole process. And then a big part of what we always do is hide the tech, right? Hide the tech. And you'll notice here a handle on the headset. So through putting on a lot of these public facing VR shows, again and again, we kept having the same issues come up, you know. People didn't want to mess their hair up. It sounds silly, but if you're having a big art opening, people are dressed up. They don't want to go and feel completely locked in, and, you know, it's, and then adding the handle on, if people aren't used to virtual reality, they don't want to feel strapped in sometimes because that's committed, and then they feel too bad taking it off. So adding the handle really kind of put the user in control, and again hiding the tech and making the technology as much of an artwork as the artwork itself. So here you can see an old viewfinder that we created, and inside was the Oculus Go. And then lastly, just to touch on another project, so it was a collaboration between Eden and Tulips and Chimneys, also myself and my sister. Again, here you see another VR headset of ours. Again, the straps are gone. Now we've got a beautiful, made it look really old to very much match with the artwork. And it was just amazing to see, by adding this handle onto the system, how much our VR adoption went up in these kind of public facing environments. And another reason why I wanted to highlight the Lost Botanists as a project is I think a lot of people have this perception that, you know, everything has to be 3D all the time. And for us, we challenged ourselves and we were like, can we create a full 360 VR experience that does not use one 3D object? And this is kind of how it ended up looking. The Lost Botanist was lots of 2D cards. My sister was illustrating all of this. Then we'd lay it out and build this world around you. And I think it was important to show that, you know, illustrators can get into the space. Traditional kind of 2D artists can get into the space. VR really lends itself to a whole new watering hole. So as I mentioned, we really, you know, we went quiet after the Lost Botanist because we've suffered the same issues over and over and over again when we were showcasing VR to people that weren't techies, to people that weren't gamers, you know, from the awkward hand holding to making sure the galleries charge the devices every night. So with that, we've been working on this hardware and software platform that really, we believe, solves all of those problems and makes VR easy. So just very briefly, we have a touchscreen here, which can be full of a catalog of immersive films. We know everyone kind of knows how to handle touchscreens. So you walk up, you choose the experience you want, you touch it. The screen then instructs the viewer, please pick up the headset to your face. As they do that, whatever they chose will begin playing in the headset. And all of this has data behind it that then goes back. So me as a filmmaker, I can be like, oh, wow, the Lost Botanist did so well compared to my other two films. And it got viewed a lot more in the London gallery than it did in, you know, the American gallery. So that stats for video content developers has been extremely important for us to get. And more importantly, which we can get it in the future, is all the big player hardware out there not many people read the small print of what you can do with those in business. And if you're not a supported territory, you literally do not have any options, because you can't change their software, you can't tweak their hardware, and you're basically locked out of the ecosystem because you are not a supported country. On that, we literally 2 days ago had Snacker on VR Day's main stage with a live demo. The person demoing here had never used the system at all before, so it was just very exciting for us as a, you know, an African company, being from South Africa, seeing this on one of the biggest kind of European VR stages, and seeing the tech demo work live on stage, which I'm sure all of you know, tech demos are just, you do not do those. And then just to wrap up, while I'm playing a lot in this space, I often spend my time on the fringes, on, you know, what is happening on the kind of, on the distant fringes of VR. Like, yes, it's not accessible to everyone yet. It's not maybe the monetization, but this is something we have every week. It's the Metaverse meetup in VR Chat. And I think, you know, anyone that knows VR Chat, the first time you go into it, it's terrifying. It's very weird. It's like this thing, and then everyone leaves and never visits it again. But once you dig past the curtain on what's happening on these platforms, you know, we saw it with the Venice Film Festival, we saw it with New Images Festival, and now the Rain Dance space is absolutely beautiful. For anyone that has a headset, please check that out. So I'm very interested in the space and the kind of content creation capabilities it's enabling. Also for people that are creating content, shooting documentaries inside of VR Chat, because there's camera systems and stuff. So, you know, on the fringe, I really like to explore this. And again, I really like to bring people into these spaces and kind of really help onboard them and draw the curtain away, as it was for myself, so they can see kind of the deeper edges of these weird worlds. And that is a little introduction and setting the context. Thanks very much.
Thank you so much, Rick. I started off by saying that I am in awe of how your brain works, and I guarantee that now everybody who's watching this across Zoom and across Facebook now, and, you know, as it's kind of recorded for later as well, is going to absolutely agree with me. You've definitely touched on a lot there. Something I think is really interesting is this idea of like putting the viewer in control, like making sure that somebody's comfortable in how they're like entering a VR experience. I think that that's, you know, really critical, you know, as we're kind of thinking about the work we do as storytellers, because storytelling is impossible without sort of having somebody on the other side to actually listen and sort of receive it. I think audiences are really a critical part of this ecosystem. So I guess that with that, I want to turn it over to Leen. You've been working towards building platforms that kind of meet audiences where they are and kind of democratize access. So I'd love to hear more about what you're up to with LucidWeb.
Sure. Let me also share my screen. Is the presentation showing?
Yep, we've got it.
Perfect. So yes, my name is Leen, founder of LucidWeb. We are a technology company, and originally we focused on web VR, but in the meantime, we're a web XR company. So it's basically a combination of web VR and web AR. Both technologies, we're looking at how can we accelerate audiences having access to it. So how can we lower the threshold for people to have a first VR experience or first AR experience? So depending on the medium for VR, when you're on your phone, for example, how can you immediately have access to a 360 experience without having to download an app, without having to delete other apps on your phone? And the same thing for AR. How can we immediately show a 3D model in your space? So we're trying to create a direct line from the content to the consumer. And for this to do, we basically work via the browser. So we work via the Chrome browser, the Safari browser, Edge, Opera. So the browser that is available on the device, we're going to try to use that as a tool to reach the audiences wherever they are. Most devices have a browser immediately installed as a default. So we're kind of looking at that as an access tool and say, okay, we can use that. You don't have to pass by any store. So since 2016, I've been focused on trying to see how does distribution for VR storytelling work. And without going into too much technical details, today, if you're a content creator, publisher in general, and you want to make sure that your story is seen in VR, then you normally build an app for the device that you target. So it means that if you want to be on an Oculus device, you have to build an Oculus app, HTC, an HTC app. If you want to be on the phones as well, you have to build an Android app or an iOS app. So it's a lot of apps. It means a lot of money and a lot of time. Also, one of the big disadvantages is that once you build an app, of course, if you want to update anything about the content in the later stage, you have to basically start again and edit the app and then upload again in the content store. So since 2017, we have been looking at this, and basically since then we had the vision of making available a platform that anyone can use. So it's a non-technical platform that is called LucidWeb Pro. It had many updates over the last years. I think the last update was this year, where we made a huge investment to go from one specific web VR framework to another. But anyhow, it's available now. So of course, anyone interested to check it out, please do. I think key to the technology is the fact that we focus on 3 devices. So we focus on a smartphone, a desktop, and a VR headset. I will show in a second how that actually works. But also you can, of course, customize the look and feel depending on your product. So since this pandemic happened, we received a lot of requests from VR festivals in how to basically translate a catalog of unique stories, basically for me artworks in VR storytelling, to an online environment. So that led us to create a new product, and we call it a VR gallery. It's a place, a hub that actually showcases a collection of VR content. It's wrapped like an app, but actually it's just running as a cloud-based solution, so running completely via a browser. The Geneva International Film Festival contacted us first. It was only kind of in mid-August. With a request, and a bit later, I think Electric Africa reached out as well. So for both festivals, we developed a product customized to the requirements of both festivals. Again, if you want to be available on a desktop, a lot of people have a desktop. So how can you reach out to audiences? Via the browser. A lot of people have a mobile, again, via the browser. The most important browsers are Safari and Chrome. And then also headsets. So a lot of people, even professionals in industry, they have a headset at home, but every time I introduce the fact that each headset is powered by a quite powerful browser, everyone is a bit amazed. Of course, when you have a headset on, you're immediately introduced into the store that the headset promotes, the headset manufacturer promotes. So of course, intuitively, like, okay, there's already a lot of content there, so why would I look at the browser? So yes, we do believe that the browser is very interesting as an access tool. Also because these browsers and these headsets, they're accessible, and you don't need to pass by a store. I think there's a lot of commotion right now related to the fact that Oculus Quest 2 has one important requirement. You have to link it to your Facebook account, otherwise you cannot have access to the headset, which also means, of course, that they have access to a lot more data. What is important with the browser, it's still managed in an open space. So the data that is running or being generated via the browser is not tracked. So that is also, I think, quite key for the browser as a solution, is the publisher basically decides if they want to track. And we as a company, we're European based. So for us, we're looking at European guidelines related to data tracking. So all the websites that we make available have the GDPR ruling, which means that everyone, with the first time they load the website, they will have the option to opt out and not be tracked. So the website or browsers in general are managed by the W3C, again, a quite open community of people representing the different browser vendors, trying to move the medium of a website in general forward. There is, of course, one big catch about browsers across devices. It's that the performance of a browser is really tightly linked to the hardware. That's the first thing. And then in the next step, it's also linked to the internet connection. So the higher the internet connection that you have access to, the less the risk of latency issues or buffering. So I've included a couple of screenshots, but I think a lot of people that are listening to this panel, they also have immediately access. So it's geo-blocked for Africa only. So if you're based in Africa, do go to the Africa gallery that we have set up. So it's basically a bit like Netflix, definitely on a desktop. You don't have to download anything, just the URL, and then you will have this gallery in front of you with at the left, the different categories. Once you click a certain storytelling piece, then there's a description page, which gives you access to more credits and more information related to the piece. And then, of course, the most important button is Start Experience. So here, basically, from a technology point of view, what we're going to do is we know at that point already, okay, the audience is either on a mobile, either on a desktop, either in the headset. So the moment they click Start, the interactivity and the way the content will be streamed will be completely depending on the device. So when you click on press or play, then the LucidWeb player will pop up. And in this case, it's completely customized to the branding of Electric Africa with control buttons in 2D and 3D. So to give a bit more make it a bit more practical. Yesterday evening, because of course the gallery only went up on Thursday, I don't have a shiny video or a movie to show off. So it's basically 3 recordings on the 3 devices to just show you how interactivity then basically changes according to the device. So here we are on a desktop, so you can navigate the categories. So either you have a touchpad or you work with a mouse. So interactivity is really, you can have access to a 3D experience on a 2D device, basically, which means when you're in the experience itself, of course, you have to move around with your mouse. Otherwise, you don't have the 360 experience. A lot of people, for the first time, they have this on a desktop. People actually don't look around, so they just passively take a step back and basically don't see the option. Sorry, I'm going to go to the next slide. The next recording is basically on a phone. Again, it's a recording of the experience yesterday evening. So it's all in a vertical interface, so vertical scrolling view, so you don't have that gallery view. And then again, here the interactivity is basically by touch because you're on your phone. You can scroll down and then again press play. And then you can watch the content in portrait, where you can move your phone, or again, you can use touch, or you can also, of course, go into landscape for a better viewing experience. And then last but not least, and I really wanted to include this as well, is the headset experience. So basically, this is a recording of an Oculus Quest 2. It's similar to the Oculus Quest 1 and Oculus Go. It's also available on a desktop VR, but in that case, you of course have to start the experience on your desktop, and then if you press the VR goggles icon, it will be showcased in your headset. Here, you basically see the default tab, and one of the buttons basically gives you access to the browser. So this is the browser. You type in the URL, and then the first step is basically to go to the VR mode. So then, of course, the 3D experience only kickstarts. So it's the same interface, but completely adapted to a completely sphere environment, a 3D environment. Where you work with the controller. So it's not the mouse, it's not touch, but in this case, it's the controllers who get activated. It works really well in that device. Of course, like I said, it's basically because the hardware is a lot more performing than the Oculus Go, for example. And yes, the internet connection was also at that point in time really good. So I streamed it here at home. So yes, I took a piece that I really, really liked.
You were the soundtrack of my childhood.
It's a little teaser.
Intrastate Ethiopian restaurant. How may I help you?
What is really key for me, basically, to conclude, is that as a technology company working in VR and AR, we are 100% an advocate of experiencing VR in a headset. So the story feels different. I'm the biggest fan of only watching it in a headset. On the other hand, I also truly believe that accessibility is the first step to making this medium more powerful, because people can actually share it with the people that they think are also interested in the same kind of new storytelling. So I think, yes, definitely the headset, but there are many ways as well to share it with people in the industry, or even not in the industry. People are interested in new ways of storytelling. So I believe it's a necessary step. And I also think the browser is really key, as a lot of people have this already just in some kind of way, and on a device they already have today. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing. I was particularly excited to see a little sneak peek of Fringe there by Ainsley Robson, which is one of my all-time favorite pieces. It's really beautiful and extraordinary. And extraordinary to see it. Yep. Go ahead.
I just wanted to say, for that piece specifically, if I experience in the headset, I automatically started dancing in the beginning. I don't know. It's like, yeah, it's really, really, really good. A very good experience.
Yeah, and extraordinary to see just the different range of ways that LucidWeb is making it possible to watch that kind of content. And I think it's sort of, necessary for, all the different kind of companies that are represented here, and the kind of span of work that we've been witnessing today, which is beautiful. Kind of necessary for all of these different types of companies and creators to be working on the solutions, to these kind of particular pieces of this industry, to the problems as they arise, and sort of collectively we're building towards, what this ecosystem is. I guess I've got a big question for all of you, now that we've seen sort of a big span of work, right from sort of how things are made to some particular examples of stories that are out there, and then starting to solve the questions around how do people actually watch these types of stories. I would like to ask each of you, what do you think makes for a good story? I'm gonna ask if any of you want to volunteer to go first, but I'd love to hear from each of you. I'm going to start with you, Leen, since you've just kind of showcased ways of people are watching stories. I guess a big part of that, as you say, kind of content is king. What do you think works in this space, and what kind of stories do you think make sense on your platform?
Yes, I think the future is bright as well for the browser. So at this point, we're kind of restricted to non-interactive 3 degrees of freedom. I think that is a main requirement. But of course, the more interactivity can be involved in an intuitive way into the story, I would be definitely a big advocate for that. But I think in terms of accessibility, it's actually taking a bit of a step back and saying, okay, to reach the larger audiences, it should be today non-interactive. But I guess going back to the example I used, I think there's a very interesting use of volumetric video, music, just at the right time, and making the right bridge to, in the first instance, having people adjusted to the experience, and then kickstart with music, and then the story starts. Like the build-up is like really in the best possible way.
Darren, I'm really curious to hear from you. Kind of, how do you choose what stories you're going to tell? How do you know if the story is going to work and what medium to use to tell it?
I think, I think most stories can work if you approach it in a way where you're really thinking about the medium and how you're going to present that story. You're adapting it for the technology that you're using. I think for me, the types of stories that work actually are kind of surprising. I think in some of the documentaries that I've made, people wouldn't automatically think, a documentary about social housing is going to be like a winner in VR, because it's not, it doesn't immediately come to mind. I think I think environment is a very big a very big I guess placing people in an environment where they can explore, that can be kind of imbued with meaning and texture, that can really kind of take you out of where you are. I like for stories to, I think the beginning of that piece that you just showed is a good example of it. That you're taking somebody once you're in an experience by the hand, and you're saying, like, you walk through the door. But good experiences, I think, make you forget where that door is. You don't feel like you could just press pause or take off the headset. You don't want to. You're being led into something. And by the time that you finish that experience, be that 10 minutes, half an hour, you feel completely changed by it. And I try and design the pieces that I'm doing it with that sensibility. I want people to kind of lose themselves in it. And so I'm trying to design everything around it, be it the music, the sounds, what sort of visuals we're using, the storytelling, all the different storytelling crafts at our disposal to really kind of just take you away completely. And I think if you're doing that, then really in terms of the subject matter, I'm not sure it necessarily matters. But I do feel that people are looking for authentic stories. People are looking for personal stories, like to be really moved. I think those sorts of things work really, really well in VR for me.
And do you feel like social impact has an important role to play in your work?
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, politically, I spend a lot of time sort of thinking about how the world in which I'm living in, or the world in which I grew up, how I recontextualizing that as I grow older, as I get, I get married, I have kids, and what do the things that I lived through kind of mean. So I'm often sort of doing that very much with a UK sort of perspective. I'm trying to focus my work on the types of stories that I feel that I can tell, and therefore, it's remained and is very much based around kind of UK culture and politics. But for me, I feel like, that there's an innate sort of power in being immersed in a story, that if used correctly, that social justice is a really good subject area to explore. I'm trying not to make my documentaries very much of a specific political point of view. I like to make a documentary first where I allow the subject matter itself to unfold, and for the people that are involved in it to share their voice. But inherently, I'm attracted to sort of stories that feature sort of definitely ideas around community, resilience, forgiveness. These are all like kind of themes that I'm very sort of interested in.
Yasmin, the range of works that you've shared with us today, from 0 Days through to Blackout through to Changing Stem, are also all dealing with kind of hard-hitting, contemporary issues. So I'm curious to hear, how do you choose what you want to work on? What stories attract you?
Yes, you hit the nail on the head. I think there's definitely, pre-obviously VR, I've always been drawn to stories that are very relevant or topical and political. Obviously, just dealing with the issues that that is the lived-in experience, or my lived-in experience. And interesting enough, it's not me, that is like, it's not my story. I'm always interested in hearing or making space for audiences. So PR, and now obviously why volumetric and immersive work is so exciting is it gives you so many tools as a as a storyteller to create that space for the audience. I think for me, what is a compelling story, or what draws me, is obviously beyond the content and what I'm trying to talk about or kind of address or have a conversation with. It's also this idea of this like form and content and the convergence of the two. Even though I am a technologist by training and a computer scientist, for me, I'm really tech agnostic, because I do believe every type of story needs a different approach or different type of tools or technology. And I would say one other thing that's kind of really interesting is kind of or at least how I think about storytelling, or like my role also, is like I don't see myself as a director ever in these projects, and I don't see the audience as an audience. I actually see kind of like, what Darren was saying really resonated with me, where there's now this sort of different relationship between a director and an audience in an immersive space, and the stories need to reflect that. And so I guess I see myself more like I don't know, world builder, or like an influencer or something, and creating the space for the audience actually, because they're navigating it, and also, that they're the storyteller themselves. They actually are the storyteller of this space. And I guess lastly, I think there's just like talking about all the different exciting experiential tools at your disposal, right? Like a camera move to adaptive audio to obviously all the things you can do. I'm obviously biased towards volumetric filmmaking, but the creative aesthetic spectrum of what the representation of human form and people in the world looks like. So there's just so many layers of magic. So I think I guess all that says, what I'm trying to say, it's like I like to tell stories in ways that haven't been done before, or like tell stories in new ways. I think all of what I just said is just like the perfect kind of mixing pot of all of those tools.
I think something that really stands out to me as kind of a common thread between all of you. I mean, each of you are kind of working in very different countries and on very different projects, but it seems like each of you kind of operates in a very hybrid role. You've got sort of different backgrounds that you led before entering kind of XR space, and even within the work that you do now, it seems like you're always sort of wearing multiple hats, which I think is kind of led to some of the extraordinary work that you're doing, because you're able to sort of bridge these different worlds. But I'm curious as if whether that's sort of a function of just sort of who you are as individuals and your interests and following your curiosities, or if it's more a function of the fact that the ecosystem itself hasn't matured yet, and you're sort of required to have all these different specializations, and sort of the jobs of the future are going to sort of demand for people to be these polymaths. And I guess along with that, how does that then translate into the types of teams that you work with, and defining new roles for people within teams, and to translating, communicating, between the creative side of things and the technology side of things? Rick, I mean, you are incredibly collaborative in the way that you work with different artists. So I guess turning it over to you, how is it that you come to kind of exist in this hybrid role, and how do you then use that to kind of communicate with the teams you work with?
Yeah, so I very much believe, like, a lot of very techies, I think it's just part of their nature to be curious, and curiosity killed the cat. And I think for techies, it's that fundamental quest to understand things that you don't understand. And I think by that very nature, because we're in such an exciting space with immersive media, we're seeing a lot of different tools coming out where even the people developing them don't know what the actual real purpose might be. They might think like, okay, this is going to be great for this, but then what ends up happening is a completely different set of people adopt and use the tech for something that even the developers themselves had no idea that it existed. So I think, in terms of, I think it's definitely a personal trait, that curiosity of using tech. But I also think because being in tech and in the art and XR space, it's more an exciting thing than anything else. So it's not so much like, oh, I need to learn this tool, at least from our side, like I need to learn this tool to do a job. It's more like, wow, this thing's just arrived. It says it does this, but I wonder if I could, and that kind of leads you to those experimental parts. And I think for us, the important part is to distill that technology that you understand and demystify it before you take it to someone else that isn't a techie, that doesn't have that, like, I'm going to dive in head first, that might be a bit reserved. I think it's very important to help artists remove that fear of it being technology. And I think that's where Eden plays quite strongly, in terms of, because we all kind of have a strong art background, we know how to almost translate the super technical stuff into a more creative space. And I think for us, it's always quite important when working with storytellers and artists to really get them to understand the tech, because we don't want them, as an example, to create something in 360 just using a 360 camera because it's 360, and then you're scrolling around, you're missing the points of interest. So it's very important to really say, like, this is 360, so understand you don't have a film crew, you can't frame a shot, so look at the negatives of that, and that's where the real opportunities are. Where, as an example, Wayne Barker's show, it was like, we really wanted to guide people specifically, and we knew there was a problem in kind of 360 of how to grab someone's attention. So we flipped that on its head and made it that only when people gave the attention were they then rewarded. So we always knew that, when someone was looking in this area and we triggered this, we knew already their gaze was happening in that specific area. So very important to demystify and try and explain how that tech functions in its technical capabilities, because that will lead to very interesting storytelling methods.
Yeah, I come from an early background in filmmaking, I guess, and so I guess if I think about the creative process there, it almost happens kind of upfront, right? There's this ideation and writing phase, and that's sort of where a lot of the key choices are made. And then, the craft of filmmaking involves, building towards that vision on set, shot by shot and scene by scene. And then you take it to an edit room and you kind of chip away at those building blocks you captured on set. And then, hey, presto, you have a story. But working in this space, it seems like, different creative choices can be made much further down the line in the kind of production process, and there's still kind of key decisions to be made later on. So I guess I'm curious to hear from each of you, what does your particular creative process look like? I know, Darren, you mentioned that you've got a few large pieces of paper dangling from your walls right now. What happens next?
That's a very new thing. I think it's interesting in terms of, I see myself as an artist in this space, but I understand a lot of the tech, and I've learned a lot of the tech, but I don't consider myself, I'm not a developer, I'm not a 3D artist, but when I wanted to create something in photogrammetry, I found out, I researched and found out how to capture it in, and create the model. And I got to a certain stage and I was like, okay, and now I need a 3D modeler to kind of decimate this model and do all the stuff that I'm like, I get to a point. And so for me, it's kind of a bit like Rick was saying, it's like, as an artist, I need to understand all the different sort of mediums, the palette that I can kind of paint with. And often I'd be the person with a developer asking those hard questions. It's like, I want to do this, like, how do we achieve this? And that's really exciting, actually. It's really exciting because often, the answer is like, you can't do it the way that you just dreamt that you could do it. And you have to kind of then iterate. And that iteration process, I think is what you're kind of touching on, which is different to film. There's a shared language with film and a shared sort of linear process. And, working with developers and people working in game engines, but also combining 360 to that, which 360 for me works, is a very similar skill set to video and film. Is really difficult getting those things to combine and those sort of common languages to really work. And I think during Common Ground, that was a real sort of process of understanding each other, how does it work in a timeline? What does this mean in terms of trying to get something to time with music, with a video player in the background of a Unity space and all of that kind of stuff. So that's really kind of interesting. But then the other thing I was going to touch on is that not only in a creative sense, but I think that artists are having to wear a lot of hats in terms of production, distribution. It's like we have to find the money to make this stuff, convince people that it's worth making. We then make it, and there's that whole process. But then afterwards, it's like, how do we get it out there? How do we get it to audiences? how do I make something for an exhibition at, say, like Tribeca, but then also make it available to audiences in the UK who don't go to these, you know, those sorts of events. And I think that's a real kind of key thing. I think that, you know, in terms, I've just written a report, actually, I was going to mention, that is on the BFI website, which is a touring report, which was funded by them, around Common Ground. And one of the things that we wanted to do with Common Ground was really get it to communities. It's about a community, a low income community in the UK. And it's like, well, how do we get this seen? You know, because it's really about personal archives. It's about how people tell their own stories. And that's actually, it's been really, really difficult. And so this report is kind of looking at that and looking about how we get it both online and also physically to people in spaces. And I think, you know, in the ecosystem as it is, we have a lot of people and, you know, doing a lot of different, very diverse roles within sort of one ecosystem, and it needs to develop, I think, in terms to help artists kind of make their work and focus on just, you know, getting to audiences, you know.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's a big part of wearing all these different hats, is kind of all these sort of gaps that currently exist, and sort of needing to you know, find creative ways of solving these different areas. I guess just circling back to the idea of creative process, Yasmin, would you like to kind of share what that looks like in, you know, as you're building projects?
Yeah, I'd love to. I wish I had a visual diagram, because you know, Caitlin and I are colleagues, and she probably knows what diagram I want to share, which is kind of this crazy squiggly line of a mess of iteration, and then convergence and divergence, and then squiggly line. But I guess to just like to speak to the creative process, I actually have a real answer, which is, and I don't know if it's because I am a hybrid. I don't know if, like, I am a technologist and a storyteller, but for me, I'm like, technology is an empowering medium. It's always been, and everyone at Scatter is a hybrid. You know, as Kayla mentioned, she also has a film background, and all of us are a mix of artists and technologists. But I think for me, this idea of working from a hybrid space and working in work that is hybrid, I actually see the creative process as the innovation, like the process itself is the innovation. And the reason I say that, it's because like every project is very different. It's always like, who are the audiences, and, you know, how to deliver to them, and what is like the best way to communicate. But then also, what does the story need, and like, what are the demands of the story? And I kind of see the story dragging me, you know, through the mud and you know, blood, sweat, and tears, and try to figure out creatively what, you know, how to work around it. And I guess like for me, it's part of like this is what where you land in, like, it's a very iterative process, just like what Darren was mentioning for me as well. But it's also like this kind of open, like I like to always keep opening things up, and I never like to feel like there's some convergence until finally we've gotten far enough in testing, whether it's user testing or internal testing, to kind of see if like all the, you know, this world we're building and the experience design and all of these things and the story are kind of finally landing somewhere and clicking. If not, then I like to keep it in this evolving process, because in the end, it always lands somewhere quite new. And I actually feel like I'm doing something right as an artist if the project lands somewhere very different from where it started. Then I'm like, this is the right path. And one thing I'll also mention, and which maybe is unique to being a hybrid, and maybe, you know, Rick can speak to this too, which is a lot of times it's like, it doesn't matter if the tools don't exist. And I think there's kind of a way of working where we do work, especially at Scatter, and this is, you know, true to all of us, we really do work where like, we know we're going to have to build tools to fill in the gaps, or we're going to have to add new features to the tools we already make to fill in the gaps to achieve the creative vision. And I think there's something interesting about working in that way, because it's always kind of like, speaking about not just as a storyteller, but as a technologist, you're really building a tool that you need, you know. And I think it's an interesting way to work as a hybrid, not only as myself, but as a hybrid company too. So yeah.
Yeah, we are very nearly at time, and it's been extraordinary to hear from all these different perspectives. I would like to end by, I guess, asking Rick, you know, as you're reflecting on your own creative practice as well, and what that looks like, is that the same thing, or is that completely different as you're thinking about the road to developing a tool like Snacker, where you're letting the audience kind of inform what this piece of technology should be? Does that have the same kind of collaborative approach, or should we be thinking about that differently?
I think very much so. It absolutely has that collaborative approach. I think for us, it wasn't really, we went in and we were like, okay, we want to make a product and let's look for the challenges. It really was the opposite, where we were already collaborating with galleries and with artists, and things would work beautifully. And then someone would forget to charge the device. And unfortunately, when that happens in a tech show, the whole show falls because it relies on the technology to run it. So I think with us, it was very much because we were able to play with so many artists in so many public faces. And I'm including Lost Botanist in that because, you know, we were at Comic-Con where there's just thousands and thousands of people coming through the door. And again, facing these challenges of an example, like I'm sure everyone who's ever shown something on an Oculus Go, if you see that little red light going, you know the battery's about to die. But your absolute terror sitting inside you that someone's watching it and it's just going to like die halfway through, right? That's all of these learnings for Snacker came through that collaborative in terms of like, it was challenges that we saw through collaborating and through playing naturally. And then just on another side of that, I think it's very important to kind of, talk artists through the technology, because quite often a storyteller might approach us and say, this is what I want to do in VR. But it might not necessarily be the best option for them just because they don't understand, there's X, Y, and Z, as Yasmin was saying, they might be like, no, I want to go get a full body scan at this, but they just don't know that other options might exist. So I think very much experimentation, collaboration, and making artists and storytellers feel comfortable to ask those type of questions about the technology. Or else they might be creating VR films and still, if you come from a video background, they still might apply all the same rules and stuff that they did when they were making 2D videos. Meanwhile, they really have to almost take that, throw it out the window, keep it there, but come with a completely fresh approach and then take what they've learned traditionally and apply that once they understand the nature of the technology a bit more. So yeah, very much, I think, especially with tech, experimentation is key, because you never know, you might find a gold mine that, like the Xbox Kinect as a great example, it was built for gamers. No gamers wanted to really use it and get off their couch. But then this whole hacker community was like, wow, check out this piece of tech. Now you can't buy them anymore because they're so popular. And Microsoft's now developed a whole new enterprise business version of that hardware because of tinkerers and hackers and people experimenting with hardware that was said to be for one thing, but creators make it for almost its true nature, which I think is very, very exciting.
Yeah, I think it really speaks to the role of people who are curious and tinkerers and hackers and kind of, setting up, where we're headed in the future. And I guess to our audience who's watching today, I mean, there you have it. You've heard from 4 people who are very much architects of what's coming next. And 15 years from now, you can kind of look back on this moment and draw the line between what is being made today and the kind of problems that are being solved today, and what these folks are up to. So Rick, Yasmin, Darren, and Leen, thank you so much for taking the time today. It's been a real delight to hear from all of you. And I guess we'll leave it at that. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, everyone. Lovely seeing you all.
Yeah, thank you. Bye-bye. See you soon.